All right, we want to take you back to our top story. Worldwide condemnation to the murder of anti-Putin activist Boris Nemtsov. He was gunned down yesterday near the Kremlin. Supporters are remembering his life in Russia and Ukraine. Meanwhile, Western leaders are calling for a transparent investigation into his killing. Well, Boris Nemtsov is one of several prominent Russian political activists who've become well known in the West. Another is Garry Kasparov. He first came to world attention as an international chess master, but he's also played a prominent role in modern Russian politics as a critic and opponent of President Vladimir Putin. Well, Garry Kasparov joins us now from our studio in New York. Great to talk to you, Mr. Kasparov.
Thanks for inviting me.
So what was your reaction when you first heard that Boris Nemtsov had been killed?
I was shattered. I knew Boris for a long time, for more than 2 decades. And since 2004, when he lost his seat in the parliament, we have been working together in building different opposition groups to oppose Putin's regime. And Boris was an amazing man, full of energy, full of life, and ignoring all the dangers and threats. He has been working tirelessly until his last hour to reveal the crimes of Putin's regime.
I see that you wrote on your Facebook page that a man of Boris's quality no longer fit Putin's Russia. What exactly did you mean by that?
Boris was a big man, not only physically. He was a man of different qualities, the man who, even knowing the risks, still couldn't do otherwise but standing for the truth. And just 40 minutes before being murdered, he had his last interview when he called Boris Yeltsin's selection of Vladimir Putin the gravest mistakes of his presidency. We know that Boris has been working on his new report disclosing the presence of Russian troops in Ukraine. And before he had numerous reports describing the wrongdoings of Putin's inner circle, ransacking of Russian treasury by Putin's friends, and many personal attacks on Vladimir Putin's record of destroying democracy in Russia and violating human rights.
You know, even though yourself and Nemtsov were colleagues of sorts, I understand that you didn't always see eye to eye. What did you guys disagree on?
We had a disagreement in 2011-2012 period at the time of these big demonstrations, because Boris believed that we could always find a path for peaceful transition, and I had different opinion. I was very skeptical about any ability of the opposition to bring Putin's regime to the negotiating table and to look for peaceful ways of bringing Russia to a normally functioning democratic state. To the last minute, Boris kept his beliefs, doing absolutely everything he could to avoid what he thought would be tragic for Russia, another revolution, turmoil. Even Maidan, though he was a big supporter of Ukrainian Maidan in 2004, he was also a big supporter of Ukraine these days. But he thought that Maidan-type revolt in Russia could be really dangerous for the future of Russian state. Maybe deep down he had doubts about the possible peaceful transition with Putin, but he always wanted to make sure that he would not cause any violence himself.
So what do you think his death means now for the pro-democracy movement in Russia?
It's a clear signal. You know, his murder was a lethal one because it was committed in front of Kremlin. There are more video cameras, recording equipment at that place than in your studio. And the very fact that those who committed this horrible act chose this place instead of actually waiting for a few more 100 meters and finding, you know, a dark corner in a mews or in a yard next to Nemtsov's apartment, demonstrates that they believed that they would not be caught. They had strong backers, and it was a clear signal. You know, seeing Nemtsov's body lying down on the bridge, few hundred yards away from Kremlin, That's the most powerful signal they could send to anybody in Russia who is still thinking of opposing Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, it certainly sends a message. So let me ask you, how will you remember Boris Nemtsov?
I can't imagine anyone else who was so full of life. So Boris loved life, but he also couldn't act differently, because for him, being alive meant being active, proactive, and fighting for his ideals. And it's this death. It's probably will be what's happened there at that bridge will be probably it's this final memory that we all keep, because he sensed that it could happen. You read these interviews in February, last two interviews these months, and he talked about it. He talked about this threat. I knew from him that his mother many times told him, Boris, stop please, because Putin would kill you for what you're doing. But even recognizing that, he couldn't stop. And that's the act of a great man, and I will remember him as a martyr who just sacrificed himself for the freedom of our country.
I'm sure you've heard that Vladimir Putin has sent a letter to Boris's mother saying he will personally lead the investigation and track down who did this. Who do you think killed Boris Nemtsov?
Boris' body was still lying on the bridge, where Putin, or actually Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said that according to Putin, that was an act of provocation to discredit the Russian government. That already tells you how this investigation will be conducted. Again, we can speculate about any possible scenarios, but what we know that so many Putin's enemies have been killed. And every time we hear the same story that somebody did it to discredit Vladimir Putin. And I have no doubt that people behind Putin, people from Putin's inner circle, they were those who gave an order to commit this crime. I doubt it was Putin himself, but there's such a powerful party of war in Russia. And today, Russia is living in an atmosphere of fear, paranoia, hatred, 24/7. Russian media, the Putin's propaganda machine, have been poisoning minds of Russians. And having this atmosphere at the same time with thousands and thousands of those who are returning from Donbass, those who know how to kill and believe that the enemies must be punished ultimately, and being Nemtsov and other opposition leaders being called the fifth column, national traitors, with their faces on the big billboards spread around Moscow. Even if it's not Putin himself, it's a regime that was behind the murder and made this the tragedy almost unavoidable.
Mm-hmm. It's clear that this news is not easy for you to digest. I just want to ask you, do you ever fear for your own life?
I live in New York for the last 2 years. So I left Moscow in February 2013 without any plans to actually stay outside of my country. But while I was abroad, I got an invitation, a quote-unquote invitation from Russian Investigative Committee, inviting me to to be questioned about one of the many political cases they opened at that time. And I spoke to my friends, Alexei Navalny, another opposition leader, and like Boris Nemtsov, and their advice was very simple. You come back, you go to this building, you enter it as a witness, and if you leave it, you will leave it as a suspect. So stay away, because this regime could do whatever. And I stayed away, so that's why I'm here, I'm alive, and Boris is in Moscow dead.
Mr. Kasparov, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us, and our condolences on the loss of your friend and colleague.
Thank you very much.
Russian political activist and chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov joining me from New York.